Welcome, gang, to another episode of the Secret Origins of Mint Condition, and yes, another segment of Joe's Comics Corner. And of course, this is Joe. They let me out of the cage once again. But first, a word of caution. Our destination to the corner tonight is fraught with peril because we are venturing to a junction of menacing mystery, heart-stopping horror, and misshapen monstrosities. We are approaching the home of the original Swamp Thing, as envisioned by the legendary creative team of Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. Helping yours truly is my special guest, a man who fears no swamp or things that inhabit it, James. So, James, how are you doing?
Good, Joe. Thank you for having me back in the corner.
Well, thank you for suggesting this. And I don't know if our audience knows your love of the Swamp Thing, so this was your idea. So if you just want to get it rolling, please go jump right into it.
Yeah, well, we've been wanting to do a Swamp Thing podcast for a while, mainly focusing on the Alan Moore run, which we will do at some point. Audience, we've mentioned it many times. We will do either just one podcast on the whole run, or maybe a couple podcasts on the run. We'll have to decide. But Alan Moore's work on the character is obviously legendary. It's iconic for comic lovers and people who are not comic lovers, but I think the original Swamp Thing by this legendary creative team of Len Wein, who we've spoken of great lengths on, on many podcasts, and Bernie Wrightson, who unfortunately he has passed, but he is one of the icons of artistic inspiration in comic books. I think the original run of the Swamp Thing character gets overshadowed by Alan Moore's run. Not to say he doesn't have respect for it, or people don't, but I don't think it gets as much time in the spotlight because of what Alan Moore did with the character. So I thought it'd be good for us to, do one on the original run of Swamp Thing, because it's something that audiences, I hope our audience will enjoy it. And it's we were just talking about this before the mics went hot. Like, it's not really superhero. It's a horror book, but is he a superhero? I guess is something to debate about in this podcast.
That is the question. Yes, that is the question. Now, Len and Bernie, Len wrote the first 13 issues, and I think Bernie comes on with what, issue 10 or 12 or 11? Let's see. I'm looking in the book right now. So Bernie leaves, and then they have Nestor Redondo, who's also a fantastic artist.
But yeah, I mean, the art's beautiful. I mean, obviously Bernie's art for the original run is it just sets a tone and a pace, and he's such a magnificent storyteller and panelist, and all of his I don't know if this is fair to say, all of his characters, if they're monsters or not monsters, are sort of have like a sinister or monster vibe to them.
They're monstrous.
Yes, the humans are not I wouldn't say they're ugly, but they're not pretty like traditional comic book heroes or people would be. Bernie's got an edge to all of his characters.
Yeah, they're gnarled, they're twisted, literally as well as figuratively. But I think that's what they wanted to do here. That's what Joe Orlando, the editor, and Len Wein and Bernie wanted to do, because they're telling a very twisted story. This is classic, classic comic book horror at its best. And it's built on obviously the shoulders of the stuff that went on 20 years prior with the EC and what Marvel was doing also. A little side note here, well, actually it's a big note, is that the early 1970s, the dawn of the Bronze Age, brought a great diversity of genres back to comic books. 20 years prior, in the early 50s, when superheroes were dying and it was just Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, you had tons of books, horror books, war, Western, funny animal, things like that. And that started happening again in the early 70s. And there were tons of books that started their titles with the word ghost or ghostly or weird or monsters of, and this book just outshone them all because it was so beautiful. It was so beautifully written and so beautifully rendered that it was amazing. I remember being in high school at the time, and we were blown away by this.
Well, obviously I was not around when it first premiered. I came to Swamp Thing much later on, earlier than I probably should have, but much later than this run, than these earlier books. But I would guess, and you can obviously correct me, he is a monster character, but he exists in the DC superhero universe proper at this time.
Yes,
like he's not like a monster book or a Tales of horror book that is its own universe or own its short tale. This is an ongoing series that's taking place in the DC universe.
The first story was this little 8-pager in House of Secrets number 92. It was a one-off. And then uh, it sold well, and the editors at DC said to Len, "Hey, what about that story you did in House of Secrets? What was that called? Oh, you mean that Swamp Thing I did? Yeah, well, why don't we do that as a regular series?" Apparently, Len balked at that for over a year. But then he and Bernie said, "Well, wait a minute, we don't have to do that character. We can create a whole new character." And they firmly placed that character in the DC universe. And by issue 7, that character meets Batman in Night of the Bat, which is one of the most iconic comic book covers ever.
Yes.
Just the lighting on that cover, the way, gorgeous, gorgeous cover. And I just read that book again this afternoon, that issue, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing the way Len and Bernie Wrightson nailed the Batman character. But yes, he was firmly entrenched in the DC universe from the very beginning.
Yeah, which I think is like interesting, because this is like I mean, I guess he's the first official character in the DC universe that's primarily a monster and it's horror based. I'm assuming, Joe, if is it?
I would think so. I mean, prior to and only maybe by a month or two, because when this came out, I believe yes, Demon Number 2 by Jack Kirby had just hit the stands the same month, and that was kind of a horror comic book also, but it's Kirby, so it has a different atmosphere to it. It's more adventurous, more fantasy oriented, I guess. What's interesting about this? Oh, yes, I would say this is the first ongoing horror, because before this you had House of Secrets, House of Mystery, Ghost, Tales of the Unexpected, Witching Hour, which were all anthology books. That's what makes this so interesting and different, is that this was the first ongoing horror character that DC did, or the first prominent one. Before that, and concurrently, as this was going on, it was just these other books that had 3 or 4 stories, 6 to 8 pages each, one shots, all good. I read all those books as a kid, also a teenager. But this was just, well, wait a minute, now this is like, okay, this is gonna continue, and he's gonna interact with the DC universe. So this was something very, very different.
Yeah, and just to kind of throw back to the House of Mystery, premiere or first appearance of the character. Later on, Alan Moore would take that story and make it part of Swamp Thing's mythology when we introduced the Parliament of Trees and the fact that he's not the only Swamp Thing. That's an earlier Swamp Thing. So that story now exists as that was a previous Swamp Thing that Alec Olson is we discover. So I liked that little touch of Alan Moore weaving in the Swamp Thing's origin into the continuity of the character. I thought it was very I guess swiftly or deftly done by a master writer at the time.
That's Alan Moore, because he puts his own spin on something. He elevates it to a new level, to really from pop art to art, but he does not trash what came before. He takes it and he elevates it and he uses it because he has a deep respect for what came before. So that's why you have to his work is just amazing. But it's interesting to note that while this book hit the stands, at the same time, Fear number 10, Adventures into Fear number 10, premiered the first ongoing Man-Thing issue. Yes. And that was created by Jerry Conway, but later on, Man-Thing really takes off when they give it to Steve Gerber. And first Val Mayer is the artist, and then Mike Plug comes on the book. So I was like, if you like swamp monsters, and I did, we had these 2 books competing at the same time, and they were different characters in many, many ways, and different motivations. And, Len was telling more visceral stories, while Steve Gerber was trying to tell more relevant stories of what, was going on in the world at the time. And Len would have that in there. He would tell, the man's inhumanity to man, like, but the Patchwork Man in issue number, what is that?
Yeah.
Right? But over in Man-Thing, there was a larger scale up on it. And he was meeting all the Marvel characters too, also at the same time.
Well, I think like Swamp Thing it's very because who knew, like, Len and Bernie, I'm sure, especially Len, the writer. Not that Bernie obviously wasn't part of the Swamp Thing storytelling, but like they didn't know, I guess, where this character would eventually go, but they already had like this idea of like a tree. Like Swamp Thing grows over time. Like like his appearance gets more elaborate by the time you reach the Alan Moore series. His ability to talk, he can't talk in the beginning. He really can't use the body, which is interesting that like those are things we think of now by storytelling because everyone's doing an arc-based storytelling or thinking their character is going to last a long time. So this is the thinking of a current writer, but to have that thinking back then of like, no, we're gonna this character's gonna evolve into being able to talk, and this character's gonna evolve and be able to use his body and his like Swamp Thing had no powers in the beginning. He's basically like a very strong he's basically a strong superhuman type of character, but he has no like real connection, at least in the first issues that we're really focusing on in this podcast, to like the fact that he's part of plant life. Like those powers were not there in the beginning. So
he's a vegetable or a vegetable. He's a vegetative Hulk.
Pretty much. I mean, he just punches people. He crashes through things. Right. He's like a lumbering oaf because he can't control his body. Which is, like I said, I appreciate it now more to think that they had that much or the idea to have it back then, that this character would evolve over time. It's really quite amazing because I don't know if that was the norm back then.
Well, something really happens big in issue number 5 where he gets his arm lopped off, right, and then it grows back. So, holy cow! Look at this. I remember reading that as a teenager. This is freaking amazing. So, every issue was episodic, complete unto itself, but Len was planting seeds, as you said, along the way. There were through lines, and that, of course, that's very very much so with the head of the conclave, with Arcane, with Abigail, and then by issue 7 we find out in Night of the Bat that the head of the conclave is this guy named Ellery, and he's living in Gotham City. And he's been, everybody wants the Swamp Thing for different purposes. Obviously, Arcane wanted him to become immortal. They wanted to buy a restorative formula because most companies in the world at that time were afraid of what this could do. If you could start growing food and vegetation to feed the planet at a great expediency and low cost, well, then it was going to put all these corporations out of business, right? So if we can't have it, destroy it. And
that's a very modern problem, though. That's like a relevant problem to today. Still,
it's still going on. Here it's 50 years later. We're still dealing with this. So again, Len isn't denying the real world relevance of this story, but it's more when you read these stories, especially the one with the witch. What was that? Issue 4.
Yes.
My notes. No, issue 4 is Monsters on the Moors. I really like that.
Well, I mean, let's just talk about like what he's the first issue is the creation of Swamp Thing,
Dark Genesis.
Then he fights his lead nemesis, Anton Arcane, and a bunch of mutant monsters.
The man who wanted forever.
Then he fights Frankenstein.
That's the Patchwork Man.
Then he fights the Wolfman.
Yep. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah, the Lemurs.
Then he's got the witches, right?
That's where he loses his arm and he grows back, right?
Number 6 is robots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the most fearsome creature of all, the Dark Knight himself.
The Dark Knight himself, yeah.
The Batman. So like he's like covered a lot of ground in like the first 7 issues of this book.
What's interesting about issue 6, the Robot Maker. What was that? What was the title of that issue called? See, I should write things down more. I thought I had enough notes, but I never do. That issue's entitled A Clockwork Horror. Well, yes. Play on the Clockwork Orange. But what's interesting there is that the man who builds the village with all the androids, he's not an evil genius, which would have been the standard fare of the time then and even now. But when his robot people are slaughtered at the end, or when they see what happens to the Swamp Thing, these characters, these androids who were programmed not to have hate and violence in them, they become the very thing that he didn't want them to become. So it's a very bittersweet, sad tale and a comment on humanity, and very, when you think of it, very portentous, because right now we're living in a world where they keep telling us AI is going to take over and probably blow us to smithereens someday. So here we have AI back in the day, 50 years ago, in the form of androids who seem to be benevolent, but because of the actions of evil people, evil corporatists, even these pure souls can be turned, and it's a very cautionary tale.
Well, that was sort of like the same. It's a spin-off of the theme from issue 3 with the Patchwork Man. Arcane is he. not, I guess, not for his own like generous purposes that he loves his brother, mainly because he's a madman of science. He takes his brother and he turns him into Frankenstein after a
Mm-hmm.
horrible accident where he steps on a landmine field in Arcane's property.
Right.
But it already seems like, basically, not that they go too much in the backstory, but that the brothers don't see eye to eye that much, and then he sort of he spawns this good man. I'm assuming he's a good enough man because it's Abby's father.
Mm-hmm.
So this good man into a monster, and then keeps him locked in a basement for however long until he escapes and gets to reconnect with his daughter in his last hour. So it's again that twisting of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
shaping it into a monster, and then a lot of these stories follow the tragic. I think Swamp Thing appealed to me though because I'm a big, obviously Universal Monster fan, and a
Right.
lot of these ended like Universal Monster pictures. The monsters, humanity would come out, but they die in the end somehow.
Well, yeah, and the monster is not the real monster; it's the humans that pursue the monster or try to take advantage of the monster. They're the monsters, right?
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, and basically, I'm sure they took. I mean, this is a trope that's used a lot, but it reminded me a little bit of the Incredible Hulk TV series because
Mm,
Kane, Matt Cable is trying to pursue Swamp Thing for the crime of Alec and Linda Holland's death. In all these issues, and he's like out on the trail on the monster and meeting up with him periodically, meeting up with Swamp Thing, but then letting him go or almost just catching him. So I was like, oh, this is like a little bit like the Incredible Hulk traveling series.
yeah, Matt Cable isn't too bright because after Alec Holland, seemingly they don't know what happened to him, right? They weren't there for the explosion where he dies into the swamp. They have a burial without a body, but then he knows that this guy Ferret was there and threatened them twice. Well, he puts Linda. He rebuilds the laboratory. He puts Linda back in the laboratory.
I know.
Like what? If you're going to do that, put a freaking regiment around that freaking building. Don't put her back there because exactly we knew what was going to happen and it did. They killed her. It's like, whoa, that was not too bright, Matt.
No, and it was also like after the first encounter with Ferret, you think he would put a whole patrol there to start
Yes.
with.
Well, we have a man patrolling in the car. Well, okay, a car in the swamp. Even if they wanted to get there quickly, they're probably going to get stuck in the mud and the mire somewhere, and things aren't going to go too well. So it's like, I know it's 1972 and they don't have the surveillance equipment that we have today, and there's no cell phones and there's no internet. But could you have given the Hollands a flare at least to shoot off?
Something.
So
poor Alec has just got his shotgun. That's it.
that's it. Yeah. And yeah, you've got to admire Alec. And another thing, Linda is as much a scientist as Alan is. So the woman isn't playing second fiddle to the guy here, right? When Alec dies, when he disappears, they figure she can resume the experiments, and it's obviously it's a tragic tale, but it's tragic made more tragic because the people that were assigned to protect them didn't do a very good job.
No, not at all, not at all. And also for this folks, I always like this piece of trivia that Matt Cable eventually becomes the Crow for the Sandman way down the road in comic book history because Neil Gaiman is such a
Completely forgot that.
fan of the original Swamp Thing and the Alan Moore run. And Matt Cable's story is very twisted and convoluted for the audience. He's Abigail's boyfriend, but then he becomes an alcoholic and gets possessed
Right.
by Anton Arcane, and then he dies and goes to the afterlife, and then at some point the Sandman picks him to be his Raven. So Matt Cable becomes the Sandman's Raven, which is I always find it interesting. Like this character eventually goes into the Sandman, which is like how comics work, very convoluted connections and everything.
Yeah, yeah. And in the first Swamp Thing movie, 1981, right? Wes Craven, correct?
Yes.
Don't they do a revisionist history with Abigail? She's
Well,
not.
Abigail's not in the first Swamp Thing
She's
movie.
not. That's right.
She's
So,
in the Return of Swamp Thing, which
I never saw that film. The second one.
yes, the second one.
I
I mean, listen, I grew up on that movie and thought it was fun and kooky, but it's not the book at all.
No, it's not.
And audiences, if you're looking for a good laugh and some amusement in the superhero genre, you can check out The Return of Swamp Thing.
Yes. The first movie is pretty good. It's got Adrian Barbeau in it. Yeah.
I think the first movie I was listening to in preparation for this, I was listening to some interviews with Len Wein, and they had like a deleted, like a special feature on YouTube from one of the Blu-rays, I think, of the Swamp Thing movie that came out recently before he passed, and he was saying like he feels like the first third of that movie is like he's like that's a pretty good adaptation of the original stories that we told. He's like he's
Yeah.
all for. He's like the ending falls apart.
Yeah, it does.
But he also says like the ending had to be different because when he went into a whole thing about how when you're changing a medium from comic books to movies, there are things that have to be changed. And
Right.
but the opening of the original Swamp Thing movie is pretty true to this book. I mean, they make a few gender swap changes, like Adrienne Barbeau is
Alice Cable.
Alice Cable, so she's
Right.
Matt Cable instead of it's Alice Cable instead of Matt Cable.
Right.
But Ed Anton Arcane is the villain instead of Ferret, who's trying to get the body restored. Right. So there are little tweaks that are actually for a movie setting and trying to make this whole universe a little bit more cohesive are understandable. And aside from the fact, like, listen, this movie was made in the early '80s, so
it's also very exploitative of Adrienne Barbeau.
It's very exploitative of Adrienne
She gets thrown into the swamp a lot.
A lot, yes. Yes.
Yeah, so
they use her as she was used at the time, unfortunately, for her Scream Queen, I guess, whatever goes along with that. So she is very exploited, but if you put some of the stuff aside, the exploitation and the rubbery effects, Wes Craven does a good job, I think, of creating the feel of the book.
Yeah. I have to watch that film again.
It's a movie of its time, audiences. So, like, there are some frownable things in it, but if you can look past some of it, it is definitely a movie that does a good job. I mean, considering before we were making comic book movies that come out like 6 or 7 times a year. This was pretty good for the early 80s. Yeah,
and I'm pretty sure, I'm typing it in right now. Swamp Thing Volume 2 cover. Was that not the cover of the?
Yes, the Saga of Swamp Thing number 2 or 3 had the movie cover.
Movie cover, right? And that's the book that eventually, I mean, that was written by Marty Pasco, I believe, which is a very good story. But then issue 20, that they turned that book over. I guess sales were flagging. They turned it over to Alan Moore, and we get one of the greatest comic book runs in the history of the medium.
Yes.
So and that may not have happened if the movie hadn't come along, right? So let's whatever you think of those first 2 Swamp Thing movies, be thankful they happened because DC brought the book back, and a year and a half later or so, boom, Alan Moore comes in and writes the most incredible story, one of the most incredible stories in comic book fiction, in comic books.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Swamp Thing is he's made he's made many resurrections, I guess, over the time, and many changes, and it's a character who he's sort of developed where you have the ability to keep manipulating him and changing him, and with the like sort of mythos and pathos that Alan Moore gave the character, you can do like pretty much anything you want with this character.
Yep.
And so in the hands of someone who's got a vision for Swamp Thing, he is a very it's a great character if you know how to write him, I would say. Like any character really, but like, he could have the powers of a god, or he can just be like human level storytelling. So you have to like know what you're going to do with him.
Yeah. Now, you being an artist, you can speak to this much better than I can, but could you give us a little critique of Bernie Wrightson's art?
Well, like we were saying, like Bernie was made for monsters. I mean, that's what Bernie drew.
Yes.
Like his style is horrific looking creatures, or misshapen monstrosities, or just classic monsters. I mean, he's got, like, if you type in Bernie Wrightson, Frankenstein, or werewolves, there's like a whole Google library full of these things.
Incredible.
And zombies, and undead skull creatures, and then other versions of Swamp Thing that aren't Swamp Thing, but they're just muck encrusted monsters. That just came out of his brain. I mean, Bernie also did a legendary illustrated version of the Frankenstein novel. So,
that's right.
So like, I think of his works he's best known for is his Swamp Thing work, and his Frankenstein work is probably the best known stuff. And those Frankenstein, it's not like a comic book for audiences that, if you've never seen it, it's not like he did a comic book. It was an illustrated novel. So every 10 or 15 pages, Bernie did an illustration based upon the book, and it's breathtaking stuff. I mean,
was that done in the 70s or the 80s, James?
I think it was the 70s, because I think he'd done the Frankenstein before he did the Swamp Thing. But those pieces are amazing, highly detailed. The light and shadow that he does in them is fantastic. The cross hatching, the line work. I mean, he is the I can't speak for these gentlemen, but I'm sure Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane took a page were inspired by Birding, because
Yeah.
he was doing those extra lines for extra definition and stuff way before those two were doing it, or were kids practicing on Bernie's work like I was. So
The lighting is amazing. This book is illustrated like a director was filming a movie. Every panel is precise and it's there for a reason and to move the story along, but also to horrify you because it's a horror book, and
yeah,
it
I mean the
achieves all of
first
that.
I mean, listen, audience spoilers. I mean, Joe and I usually do an overview of the books when we talk about on Comics Corner, and that's what Joe does in general. But spoilers for the first one, like for the first issue, because I definitely want to go into that. Like,
Yeah,
it's a tragic story. Like Alec Holland and his wife. Alec dies because they set an explosion in the barn with the biorestorative formula. He catches fire and he jumps into the river, and then comes out Swamp Thing.
mm-hmm.
And then, as Joe says, because of Matt Cable's sort of bungling or bumbling,
Yeah.
they come back and then they kill Linda as well.
Right.
So, and at the end of the book, it's like Swamp Thing holding his dead wife and trapped as a monster, and this is sort of the origins of this hero, which is like all in tragedy. And
Yes, exactly.
like there's no happiness in the first comic book.
None whatsoever. There's very little happiness in the series period. The series originally ran 24 issues, but after Len and Bernie leave, it kind of peters out. Um, to put it in context, historical context, and Len Wein also. You said we said, is the Swamp Thing a superhero? Well, Len was writing a book concurrently with the great Jim Aparo called The Phantom Stranger, which was probably at that time my favorite comic book period, even over Superman and Batman and all the rest. I just love that book. I adore that book. And was the Phantom Stranger a superhero? Is that a horror comic? I think it's a horror mystery superhero thriller, The Phantom Stranger. And as you read these issues of Swamp Thing, yes, it's horror, it's mystery, it's a thriller, and he does heroic things throughout the story. So what they mix genres in these books. It's clearly a horror book, which is what they wanted at the time. That's what was selling big time. When this book came out, it was on sale date was August 1972. I checked the Mike's Comic, Amazing World of Mike's Comics. I went to the newsstand setting. 182 books came out that month. Of those 182, 25 were horror related. And since some books were bi-monthly, a month later or a month before, Phantom Stranger, Man Thing, Werewolf by Night was the following month. That was Werewolf by Night number 2. So all these things are happening at once. And I was never a horror fan like you are, but I checked out all these books, and almost all of them I stayed with for a very long time because this was something so completely different than just your regular superhero fare.
Well, like I said, growing up, I liked monsters and stuff like that. And, I'm not even like, I've said before in our Halloween episodes, I'm not a big fan of horror. I like monsters, especially if monsters, and, and I also like the idea of the heroic monster,
Yes.
And Swamp Thing is like the hero. Because growing up, I mean, when I was growing up, the Godzilla movies at the time where Godzilla was the hero. Godzilla was the hero in those movies. He was crashing up Tokyo, but he was also, fighting the smog monster and Mechagodzilla, and the people of Tokyo were happy he was there. So Godzilla was a hero at the time. And growing up, the Wolfman's my favorite Universal monster. And if you look at Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, the Wolfman is the hero.
Yeah.
Like he's trying to kill Dracula and stop Frankenstein. So I liked heroic. I thought the idea of a heroic monster was cool, and Swamp Thing fits the bill. He's a heroic monster.
Yeah, they have to be heroic, even if by for no other means, because these corporations, these groups, these that are chasing them are horrific people. That and as they're chasing them, they're destroying villages and other people in the who get in their way. There's a lot of collateral damage in these books, a ton of collateral damage, and so these horrific, these monster characters. Who didn't ask to be monsters, by the way. Larry Talbot didn't ask to be the Wolfman, right?
No.
And Alec Holland didn't ask to be the Swamp Thing.
And it also brings me when I was growing up, the Incredible Hulk TV show, Heroic Monster.
Yeah. Well, without doubt. And I think who did that show? That was Kenneth Johnson. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
he that's the way he wanted to play it off.
You
As more of a monster, a Frankenstein, or not just Jekyll and Hyde type of character, obviously.
I mean, but also Bruce Banner doesn't want to be the Hulk,
No.
So these are all, they sort of like do the best they can with the burden that they have in life.
And they meet people along the way. They what those TV series, they are all taking their cue from the original Fugitive TV series, but it worked.
I mean, that's what Swamp Thing does in these books. He pops into these little weird places and meets people, gets into an adventure.
Yeah.
Like at this point in the story, punches the threat in the face, or sets it on fire, or throws it off a cliff, and then he moves on to the next thing. Like he's searching for. I mean, you have to remember, like, also this is very much like the plot of the Incredible Hulk TV series. He's trying to find a way to become human again.
Mm-hmm. Which he does for a brief time. What, edition number 2, right?
Brief time,
but he gets it up to save the town, because he knows what Arcane's going to do. Arcane wants revenge on that town at the bottom of his castle, at the bottom of the hill, and he has to give that up to save those people. There you go. As heroic as you can, that's Superman heroics, basically, right?
Yeah. And then the legendary issue, which we were talking about, aside from the fact that also, I just want to go back to the storytelling. Like the first page in issue 1, where they say Dark Genesis and then Swamp Thing that is like such a beautiful page. Like the where he's not the first page, like the what is it? It's the page where he's by the tree looking at the it's where the page that in the first issue where it says Dark Genesis, where it actually gives you the title,
the credits,
and the farmhouse. It's such a beautifully paneled, and foreground, middle ground, background. I'm looking at them in the omnibus, so obviously the colors have been, I think redone when they do the omnibuses. It's just beautiful. This is a beautiful layout page.
The misshapen monstrosity presses deeper into the shadows surrounding the single wooden structure that rises from the bog, and his puzzled mind fairly crackles with thought. That's just great writing. And is it purple prose? I guess so, but it's perfect for a comic book, and it's the type of comic book that can be read by an 8-year-old, or at that time, how old was I? I guess I was 16 when it came out. 16, 17, yeah. Depending on when it came out. So, there's this high school kid who's like, this is really cool. And it just draws you in. That's what Len had, that power to draw you into a story, because his prose was so beautiful, so eloquent.
He's got the Stan Lee thing when he's doing Swamp Thing, because it's always misshapen monstrosity, muck encrusted monster. It's like he's
alliteration, yes.
Using as many alliterations at the beginning of these books to describe Swamp Thing.
For those who read my show notes to introduce our podcast, you'll know that who I've been influenced by, Stan the Man Lee. I think it was an incredible style, and it worked. It's just it draws you in. You can't help it. It's something they wouldn't do today. I guess maybe it's frowned upon today. Editors don't write that way. I don't know. But I like words on the page, especially when they're evocative, and they add. See, this is what's interesting. They add to what you're looking at. It doesn't subtract from the beautiful Bernie Wrightson artwork. It adds to the artwork. It adds to the scene, and I'm getting shivers just talking about this.
Well, it's sort of like they're always the thing in comic books or any medium like TV or movies is like show, don't tell. But in this book, you get show and tell. You can show and tell.
Yeah, you see the monster on the second page. It's like, hide the monster, hide them. We don't see the shark until the very end of Jaws, right? And it works for that reason. Mm-hmm. But here, he's on the cover of the magazine. We're going to see the monster right away. We're going to get right into this, and then we'll give you the origin. And that's, the opposite of what they do today with their mystery boxes when they set things up, and you don't know what the hell is going on. I got to wait 24 issues. Jeremy Adams spoke about that on his episode of our podcast. You got to. It's best if you draw your audience in and get them into the action and into the psyche of the characters right away. And if you're doing it properly, if you're writing it well and it's illustrated well, then they're going to stay with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think an audience. I mean, especially an audience in modern time. I mean, I know we're talking about a book that's what. How many years? 30, 40?
It premiered in the summer of 1972, August, so we're coming up on 51 years.
51 years of Swamp Thing.
God, I'm old.
So, But an audience these days, I don't know if the standard, like, listen, at one point, probably hopefully soon, audience, we'll talk about Superman the movie. Superman the movie is laid
Mm.
out like a classic origin story.
Mm-hmm.
So is the original Spider-Man movie by Sam Raimi.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you can tell. I think that trope is. I don't know if audiences want to do that anymore. And I just say that because, like as you said, like we jump right into the monster and then go back and say how he became the
Right.
monster, which I think is more sensible of a sort of a modern day audience. If a modern day person was reading this book, I think they'd be more inclined to follow it because
Right.
you're giving them the monster. So okay, you gave me the monster on the first page. Now what am I reading this for? Well, you're reading it. How did he get to this point?
How do you get to become? How's this misshapen monstrosity? Wandering around this bog, this swamp. We need to tell you that, and we're going to tell you that in the first issue. We're not going to wait 6 issues so we can shove it into a trade.
Well, plus you have your. I think they're both knew their strengths. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if the team came together naturally or they were just assigned, but you're working with Bernie Wrightson. So, like, why are you going to hide the monster like to be like 5 or 10 pages in? Like,
Yeah.
you got Bernie Wrightson, who's famous for drawing monsters. You're not gonna have him use it right away, and then tell the story of the humans.
You often hear about writers, and again, I go back to our Jeremy Adams podcast where Jeremy said he was writing for the artist. He wanted, hey, I know this guy. He doesn't want to. He's reading the script. Oh no, three or four pages of talk. I'm going to fall asleep as an artist. He wants to get the guy involved, get the artist engaged. Let's give him some action. And that's what So yeah.
Plus, Len's a storyteller. Like
Mm-hmm.
as we've said, he's a magnificent storyteller. He's created like our childhood, but
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't need the trope of like waiting for the audience to see the monster because he knows what the rest of the story is. Like the mystery of who Swamp Thing is and how he became that way. That's the story, and then his journey past that into the other issues. Like I don't need to hide the monster from you because you're going to be invested into how these monsters he encountered, how they became monsters, and why are they monsters, and why is he in this place. This is what the sell is, not the hiding of the creature.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the first issue, the monster is kidnapped and brought to a Balkan country, right? Wow, that would not happen today. So the action is furious. It's a quick pace, and yet the writing is so eloquent that you never feel like it's rushed, and you just want to. I know I did reading these the last couple of days. I just wanted to sit back and relax and just immerse myself in this world that Len and Bernie created. It's a very, different, it's a horrific world, but it's a very immersive world. And I willingly gave myself up to it. And you can't say that for too many comic books, regardless of what you were talking about.
No,
This is,
yeah. I mean, I was surprised. Like, I've read this, Swamp Thing, the original, at least the original 7 issues, like many times. But I'm always amazed at how quickly the story flows and how quickly you get through an issue. And
mm-hmm.
this is, like you said, this is words on the page. There's substantial like writing in this book, but it goes because the writing is so smooth and the art is so smooth that it just flies by really quickly, and it's always engaging, always interesting. And just to talk about Bernie's work is. Arcane is even more hideous than Swamp Thing.
Yeah. Well, yes, he is.
He's drawn to be more monstrous than Swamp Thing. And I also have to say, like, the first 2 issues are some of the best Bernie stuff because, like, all the monsters and mutants he gets to draw in issue 2, like that the one creature with the head on top of a hand that walks.
Oh yeah, it's sick stuff. What was Bernie smoking at the time? Who knows? But in issue 4, when Ian finally transforms into the werewolf, there's a 5-panel grid at the bottom, and you see him transforming, and then the next page is a full page, and it's what a great drawing of a werewolf.
It's a fantastic drawing of the werewolf. I don't know who the colorist is, but making the werewolf white hair instead of traditional brown or black was fantastic because it was a werewolf, but it was like a werewolf I'd never seen before. Like it's like just so like straight. It's a unique take on the creature, and I was like, wow, this is. And the splash page was fantastic.
I should have done my homework a little more, but early on, Glenn's wife Glynis was coloring a lot of his books. Well, doing a lot of coloring at DC and Marvel. Glynis Wein was one of the greatest colorists in the history of the medium. She did some incredible work.
What a great choice, though, to make that.
She's not listed here as the colorist. Maybe it was Bernie Wrightson. It's possible. But whoever did the coloring, wow. just it works on it works on all cylinders. It's just
Well, I think
very
Bernie inked his own stuff too.
yes, he did. There's no inker here. Like there's not another Dick Giordano, who was the inker, the go-to inker of the day in the early '70s, especially at DC. Dick was inking Neil Adams. He was inking Irv Novick. He was inking Bob Brown. He was inking, and these were all Batman-related books. They wanted Dick Giordano's ink on whoever was penciling those books, but no, Bernie didn't need any help.
Yeah, Bernie was he's the pencilist and the inker. He did all, and it's sometimes a colorist. So I don't know if he did coloring on the Swamp Thing books, but he would color his own pieces too. He was like a one-stop art shop back in the
Yeah,
day.
and later on, I think he gets co-plotting also, recognition at the very end because I'm sure they did that. I'm sure this book was done in the quote-unquote DC style script, a full script, but I would imagine that Len and Bernie would sit down and hash this out a little more, maybe a little more of a Marvel style, where the artist gets a 2-page after they speak for a while. Artist and writer, he gets a 2-page or she gets a 2-page synopsis. Go home and give me the 20 pages to come back, and I'll dialogue it. But I have a feeling this book was kind of like a compendium of both styles.
Yeah, I would have to say so. I couldn't, I tried to find interviews where they talked about each other, but I couldn't really find anything. Though,
Yeah, I looked for that too. I didn't find that either. Yeah.
But Len tells a good story. I'm sure you came across this way when they were like, when they were like, "What are you gonna call that?" He's like, he couldn't find a name for this story, and he was like, and when you said like the story was like, "Wait, what about that Swamp Thing piece?" He's like, "That's it."
That's it. Yeah. And apparently he fought them for a year. He didn't want to do it, and thank God he did. So it's.
I mean, he also said he doesn't even know where the story came from. He's just like, I don't know. I was just kind of working on this thing on the subway. It was in my head. I don't know. I don't know what inspired it, but it just I had this idea of this man turning into a monster, and
Yeah, well, I mean, Len at the time. Let's see, was born in the mid to late 40s, so he's got to be in his mid 20s at this point, approaching his late 20s. So he's a child of that era who would have grown up watching all those Universal monster movies on TV, right? On a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, watching the Abbott and Costello beats Frankenstein. So he and his longtime partner in peril with comics, Marv Wolfman, and Jerry Conway and Bernie Wrightson, all these guys, and Steve Gerber, Val Merrick, and Mike Plug, all these guys did all these horror comics. They knew of the horror history in film and TV and comic books from before. So they incorporated all this stuff into their work, and I think they added something. Obviously, they added something to it, and that's what you want from each new succession of people that come into the industry. Put your stamp on it, add to it, like we were talking about before with Alan Moore.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then audiences, as we've said many times, we've only read up to issue 7. Maybe we'll revisit another rest of this run in a future Joe's Comics Corner. But like he's fully entrenched because he meets the Batman, and it's it's a great meeting. It's a great first encounter.
Yes,
So I guess by issue 7 they just wanted to fully entrench him and make sure this is happening in the DC universe. So
there are panels of Wrightson's Batman. I'm looking at one now. He's standing on a building, astride 2 ledges, and his cape is flowing in front of him and taut around his back, and he's looking out over the Batman is looking out over the pier, and it's just amazing. It's just beautifully rendered, and of course the cover, the lighting on the cover is just absolutely. I talk about my favorite covers, and I've forgotten that this was one of them. And now that I look at it, been looking at it again all today, throughout the day, it's right up there with Amazing Spider-Man 39 and other great covers. Yeah,
I mean, Bernie's Batman's like a combination between Neil Adams and Todd McFarlane's Batman.
Oh, wow! You just blew me away. Definitely, I saw the Neil Adams in there, and but you're right. Yes,
with the extra billowy cape, like the extremely exaggerated cape and the extremely exaggerated ears and the line work. Like it has the Neil Adams face, but like the Todd McFarlane extras that he.
Batman's cape is very Spawn-like, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think it's like even the Swamp Thing in the trench coat is very, very Spawn. Those lines, and it's not a Neil Adams like trench coat or drawing. It's more like a McFarlane style type of trench coat drawing. Which is fine. I'm sure he influenced both of those people, Bernie. I mean,
and in that story, Swamp Thing is a bit of a detective. How he finds out,
yeah,
so it's like, well, he is a scientist,
yes, I
so the man is not, he's obviously probably has like a 200 IQ, so this is not a some dope that was thrown into the swamp and made into a swamp monster. This is a very educated individual. So yeah, he's very he can handle himself.
and he's doing the traditional Ben Grimm trench coat hat,
Yep.
walk around.
I thought of that when I was reading that. Yeah, very Ben Grimm like, right? Yeah.
So yeah, it's great. I don't know much more good stuff I can say about this. Like, if audience, I don't know if you're sold, but you should be sold on like checking it out because it's on Hoopla. You can. I have the physical omnibus. Joe has the physical comics, but you can get the omnibus on Hoopla. You can get like 395 pages of the volume 1 of the original Swamp Thing Bronze Age era on Hoopla. You can read it.
Is that all 24 issues?
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
Wow, that's
Hoopla actually has all 3 Bronze Age volumes. They have volume number 2, and then they have the volume number 3 that eventually that it doesn't have the Alan Moore stuff in it, but it has the first 20 issues that before the Alan Moore run.
And I have in my hand a paper trade version of the Bronze Age Swamp Thing Volume 1, the first appearance in House of Secrets 92, and then Swamp Thing 1 through 13, which is all the Len and Wrightson stuff, and Nestor Redondo. They said Michael Kaluta also, and Luis Dominguez. These were also great artists at the time. Luis Dominguez was not a young man at the time, but he was been around for a while. But Kaluta's claim to fame in the early 70s was obviously The Shadow. But this book, I got it off of, I think, cheapgraphics.com, novels.com. I didn't pay the $24.99. I think I paid like $16 for it. So if you want a copy, yeah. So yeah.
And just flipping through this omnibus, audience, if you are not sold, at the end of the omnibus, they have the Swamp Thing Annual number 1, which is the movie adaptation comic book.
Nice.
It was illustrated. Well, let's see here. It's based on the screenplay by Wes Craven, script by Bruce Jones, and it's illustrated by Mark Texeira.
Teixeira. Yeah, Mark Teixeira.
And Tony DeZunga.
Yeah, I never could pronounce his name, but Tony did some of his greatest work on Jonah Hex. And that when Jonah Hex premiered, they took All Star Western and retitled it Weird Western. So, that was kind of like a horror Western comic, especially at the very beginning. Some of that stuff is incredibly graphic. I don't know how the hell they got away with it, but they did. So yeah, this the early 70s was the Bronze Age was a great era for comic books. As important as the Silver Age, and even more diverse. Definitely more diverse than the Silver in the characters they put out, but also in the content they put out, and the packaging too. We had 100 pages, we had things like that. So it was a very interesting era for comic books. So if you can get your hands on trades or even originals from that era, do a deep dive into the Bronze Age. And if you want to center in, then do a deep dive into the horror comics of the Bronze Age.
Yes, and they're doing a great job collecting them. The omnibuses are coming out now. I don't know why it took them so long to do them, but they're finally doing them.
I don't think horrors have gone out of vogue, right? In Hollywood, has it?
I mean, how a horror goes in waves. I mean, it kind of depends on the horror, what people are looking for. Most horror spawns out of the time period, right?
What's the term they use now today? Body horror.
Body horror, I guess, is in. I don't know if body horror is more in the 80s. A lot of the movies.
This book there's a lot of body horror in this book.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing is body horror. But
exactly.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's hard to say. Like a lot of horror, like a lot of the movies that are really scary, which I don't watch because that's not my type of thing. Like
I'm gonna be grossed out now.
Well, they also talk about like this psychological, emotional horror, like these movies like Hereditary, which are about possession and ghosts, and I haven't sat through that. Audience, if you're like saying, "Oh my God, he hasn't sat," I just haven't sat through them. I'm sorry. and I also, audience, I'm going to throw a pop culture confession in here.
Oh, here we go. This sounds good.
Is I have not been in the emotional or mental place to sit down and watch The Joker yet either. So the Joaquin Phoenix movie.
Right. The sequel is coming out with Lady Gaga.
Yes, that's
Would it be a
Harley.
musical?
Yep.
Okay.
I just haven't been there yet personally to sit down and watch this movie, which I'm looking forward to. But I just haven't. I feel like I have to be in the right mental place to sit down and watch the Joker.
It's
So
disturbing.
yeah,
It's very disturbing. It's take Moon Knight, the 6 episodes of Moon Knight, put it on steroids, and you get the Joker movie. It's very disturbing, but it's a very good film. Yeah, don't watch it in the evening, James. Watch it in a bright daylight.
yeah. So so that's so just this kind of ties in. I'm not watching that. So some of the other horror stuff that some of you might be saying, I'd love this, I'd love that. I probably would if I was in the right frame of mind. So but
Yeah.
horror takes many forms, and horror is like one of those things that is like comedy, sort of comments on the time at which it was made. I think so.
Yes, like science fiction, uh, good fiction, good literature, whether it be pop culture literature or quote unquote serious literature, always comments on the time and always reflects back to the reader what's going on in the world at the time and makes you think and question, which we should always do.
Yeah.
So, and this is one of the series that does that very well. So as we close, what other things could we recommend? I think I just recommended an entire decade of comic books, but
Yes, we did. I recommended 3 volumes of a Bronze Age book that are each about three to 400 pages long. So I don't
yeah.
know if I don't know if
Well, I'll just pop back in and say if you can get a hold of Phantom Stranger, is that on our non-sponsor sponsor?
no, I would love to read that
Uh,
again, Joe, because you kindly let I forget most of the stories because you let me borrow them so long ago. But it's I
yes,
think you said the omnibus is coming out, which the omnibus
yes, I
well,
have
I
mine
mean
on order.
maybe Discount Trades has it, but the omnibus I think on Amazon's like $150 for the Phantom
Yeah,
Stranger.
I got it for 75 with my discount comic book services account, and I think I'm
Yeah.
getting it probably early September. That's when I'll be seeing it. I can't wait for it. Um,
Oh, the Phantom Stranger omnibus is due August 29th, according to
oh,
Amazon.
okay. If folks, if you can also check in on that man thing I mentioned before, I think you'll like if you like the Swamp Thing or you'll like the man thing. Um, it's different in many ways. It's similar in some ways, but it's also worth reading. So I guess that's our recommendations.
Yeah, I
So
think those
yeah,
are good. I'm trying to think what else we could recommend right now, but it hasn't come to me. So I think those are good recommendations for
yeah,
this
definitely.
episode.
James, this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this. I mean, anytime I get to talk about Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson is a good thing, and talk about a great character like the Swamp Thing. It's. I'm just going to leave you with a funny story. We were sitting around the lunchroom at Bishop Lachlan many years ago, I guess when these books were coming out, and we were thinking of well, DC should do like they had DC specials and things like that. Why don't they do a a baseball team? Superheroes versus supervillains, which they eventually did a few years later. But we were building our team, and we were going back and forth. No, that person should play this, and everybody agreed that the Swamp Thing should play third base because it's the hot corner, and he can dive and stretch out, and nothing would get by him. I suppose he could also play first base. Nothing would get by him there either. But yeah, you got to play him on the corner, definitely. But let's put him at third. So I just wanted to throw that out. It's Swamp Thing at third base.
Oh my, that's great. That's great. That kind of harkens back to when we had your Joe's Comics Corner for your birthday when we asked you to put a baseball team together using
Yeah,
all the Marvel or the Marvel characters because it was
Marvel
like
characters is a baseball team. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So
I had the
no,
Hulk hitting cleanup.
that's right.
Why not? Best power hit in the league.
Absolutely.
So folks, as we bring this to a close, I want to thank James again. James, thank you for suggesting this. This was a great topic to speak about and to have some fun with. And so thanks again, James.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you for indulging me and audience. At some point, we will get to the legendary Alan Moore run, but this should whet your appetite until then.
Right. And then, folks, you can follow us on Instagram and our Facebook page. We would greatly love your critiques of what you hear here, good and bad. Don't be afraid to tell us when we're not hitting the nail on the head properly, whatever. But and then like and subscribe. We would like you to do that also. So so this is Joe and James. We're going to say goodbye, and there'll be more of these coming, as James said. So in the meantime, just stay well, read comics, and enjoy.